Well, I think that what we'll probably do is make the press conference relatively informal. I think that Polly has indicated in the opening statement what the struggle that we've come to support is all about. Let me say that what is happening in Boston, we feel, is a part of a national trend. You have the racist violence erupting around school busing in Boston, and just a few months ago in the city of San Francisco, which traditionally has had the reputation of being one of the most liberal cities in the country, you had reactionary racist organizations, the American Nazi Party in particular, invading a school board meeting at which a busing plan was being discussed, creating a riotous situation, attacking black people both through their literature in the most virulent manner and through actual physical attacks. If any of you know of the case I'm referring to, the black woman teacher who attempted to urged that the Nazis be excluded from that meeting found herself later facing charges of inciting to riot, and the next meeting, the American Nazi Party members were escorted by the police of San Francisco. And I think that we have to see these kinds of outbreaks as part of a trend, not as a result of some men sitting in a room making plans to create this kind of disruption all across the country, but as a part of a trend that emerges out of a developing racist climate in this country. Because these people feel that they are going to receive the protection of those who wield power. Therefore, they are far more willing and feel far more comfortable when they surface and when they launch these attacks. And we are attempting, through the vehicle of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, to bring into our movement all people, regardless of their color, regardless of their political beliefs, as long as they identify with the progressive community of peoples in this country. We are attempting to build the kind of United Front People's Movement, which is the only way we feel we are going to put an end to this developing racist pattern in this country. And with that, I would like to throw the press conference open for questions and answers.
Ms. Davis, are you aware of any opposition coming to Boston? And if you are aware, what is your reaction to that, please?
Well, I don't know. And I just arrived very, very late last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, so I haven't really had a chance to find out what the newest developments in Boston are. But I'm sure the Ku Klux Klan is opposed to our, building this movement. I know that sisters and brothers who work with the Alliance here in Boston have received threats, bomb threats and so forth. But those kinds of things, of course, are meant to terrorize us, are meant to force us to dismantle our efforts and our struggle. And certainly we aren't about to bend to that kind of pressure. And we feel that the only shield that we can erect against those kinds of things is a massive people's movement. Through our numbers and through our unity and through our organized force, we will be able to push those kinds of attacks, repel those kinds of attacks, and eventually overcome them.
Mr. Davis, in addition to joining the Alliance and becoming a part of the struggle, do you have any specific advice or suggestions for the parents of black children that are now involved and being victimized by the violence that is taking place in the schools here in Boston?
Well, I think that, again, what we have to talk about is organizing and uniting. And let me give you an example, which I think is very fitting. It doesn't necessarily relate to the school situation, but it, I think, can be applicable. we went to North Carolina, the Alliance did, on July 4th of this year, in order to protest what we felt was the most severe manifestation of both racist and political repression in the country. And you know perhaps about the fact that there are more people on death row, including an Indian woman and a black woman in North Carolina than any other place in the country. You know perhaps that there are more political prisoners. There are men and women, sisters and brothers such as Ben Chavis facing over 200 years in prison as a result of his activity in the liberation movement. So we said that the only way we would be able to make a dent in that apparatus of repression would be to bring people from all over the country to North Carolina on July 4th. Now, as a result of our efforts and as part and parcel of that repressive apparatus again, the groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, the Minutemen, the John Birchers, and an organization called the Rights of White People developed an alliance. And they issued threats to us. They said they were going to stop our demonstration. They were not going to allow us to come to Raleigh. Now, they said that they had 700 forces that they were going to post alongside the march and disrupt it and prevent it from going forward. Now, if we had been able to bring out into the streets of Raleigh only 1,000 people, I'm certain there would have been a disaster. There would have been a confrontation. If we had been able to bring only 2,000 people, there would have been problems, or even 3,000 people. But because close to 10,000 people showed up on the streets, that completely neutralized anything that those Ku Klux Klansmen, the Rights of White People, the John Birchers, and the Minutemen were able to do. In fact, most of their forces didn't even show. There were about 15 of them standing alongside the demonstration. And I'm convinced that if we can talk about bringing out black parents and white parents as well, and developing a vigorous show of unity, that will completely neutralize the efforts of these people who come out with their rocks and with their racist epithets and hurl them at our children. I think that is the only solution. That is the only way, through mass struggle, united struggle.
Ms. Davis, how do you view the black community here in Boston?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I just, we don't have that much time, and if there are other people who want to have questions, let's try to get around the room.
Will you be working with the prisoners movement in Massachusetts and California? With prisoners movement?
With the prisoners movement? Well, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression has as one of its main functions to develop a movement to launch a political assault on the prisons in this country. What we have done is to highlight several important cases in terms of developing a national movement around prisons. Attica, for example, and I think all of us should be aware of the fact that the Attica brothers are on the verge of going to trial, and particularly in view of the fact that the man who is responsible for the massacre of the 43 people is about to be confirmed as the vice president of this country. We are working around the case of Martin Sostre. Also the San Quentin Six, Rochelle McGee and the Leavenworth brothers, who are facing trial at this moment in Wichita, Kansas. And through those cases, we are attempting to develop a national campaign to expose and bring about some kind of change within the prison system. At the same time, all local affiliates and chapters of the Alliance are charged with going in to the prisons in their area, finding out what is happening behind those walls, developing methods of struggle with which to express support and solidarity to all the sisters and brothers who are incarcerated unjustly. We are now in the process of developing a nationwide movement to deal with women's prisons, because unfortunately too often when people talk about prisons they forget about the fact that there are women in prison all over this country. So we're working around the California Institute for Women in California, and certainly the women's prison in North Carolina, where Marie Hill, who is a sister around whom we have an ongoing effort where she is incarcerated, and then of course in Alderson Federal Penitentiary where Lolita Lebron is incarcerated.
What are some particular problems that are affecting women's prison as opposed to the other prisons? Are there some particular problems that they have?
Well, there are problems which first of all, relate to the fact that women's prisons in general are considered to be, well, they're called campuses most of the time. And you may go to the California Institute for Women or Alderson, and you see on the outside grass and trees and cottages, and you would perhaps get the impression by looking at the external face of the prison that this is a relatively humane way to do time. But then you go into the prison, you talk to the sister there, and you discover that there is as much political pressure exerted on the sisters inside the prisons. Those who are active in the radical movement, the movement against repression, the movement around socialism, are subjected to many, many forms of harassment and intimidation and outright brutality in many instances. And there are movements developing inside women's prisons. Unfortunately, there are not enough people who are aware of those movements, and therefore there's not enough support on the outside. And that's one of the things that we're talking about.
Do you have priorities on, say, maybe in relation to the coming election, what you think to 1976, or what should be the priorities that we should seek the changes in the government? What's going on?
Well, I think that the most important thing is to be vigilant right now, not only, in terms of the elections, but at every single moment. Too many people were so happy about the fact that Richard Nixon finally resigned that they allowed themselves to be completely deluded by the ascension of Gerald Ford to the presidency of this country. And one of the things that was so clear was that there was a very determined PR campaign with all of the pictures of Ford doing the things that the average man in this country is supposed to do, and then with the pictures of him jumping in the swimming pool and dancing in the White House. And people really, really allowed themselves to forget, what are the policies that this man represents. And they did not understand that they are the very same policies that Richard Nixon represents. And by creating that kind of a shield of being the man who has to cook his breakfast when his wife gets upset with him, then people, fail to see that he was talking about more defense spending. He was talking about cutting back on programs which affect poor people in this country. He's talking about more so-called law and order. He just spoke at the International Association of Police Chiefs the other day in D.C., calling for more efficient methods to combat crime. And so I think that, and then of course, then he nominates Rockefeller, and people forget about Attica. And I think that we can't allow ourselves to be so oblivious to the realities, the political realities surrounding us. And if we're seriously going to talk about affecting immediately the political situation in this country, I think that we have to talk about leaving the whole structure of not only the Republican Party but the Democratic Party as well, because both of them are beholden to the interests of monopolies in this country. Excuse me, I think the sister next to you had a question.
And let's to the schools. Would you care to address the issues here? There seems to be a lot of people in Boston who want to call this anti-busing and anti-whole lot of everything but what it used to be called. Would you address that for me?
Well, you know, I was just looking at a newspaper. Where was it? There's an article on the Ku Klux Klan in the Valley. They held a rally not too long ago. And let's see if I can find it. You see, what does David Duke, the National Director of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, tell a, quote, cheering crowd? He says, the real issue isn't a school here. The real issue isn't education. The real issue isn't a school here or a school there. The real issue is, quote, niggers, unquote. And so, see, I think that you know, whether or not we agree that busing is a solution to the problems of education. And certainly busing is not a solution unless there's going to be a struggle for quality education, not only in the black community, but in the predominantly white communities as well. I mean, that's a question that's apart from I think the real issues that are incorporated in what's happening right now. And everybody who considers himself or herself in any way progressive or opposed to in this kind of inhumanity has to support the right of those young children to go to that school without being stoned and without being the target of racist epithets. Because see, if this is allowed to mushroom into a more disastrous situation than we're facing now, it's going to erupt all over the country, not only around schools, but we're going to see, and let me put it this way, I said before that I saw this as a part of a pattern, a part of a trend. I think that you have to relate that to the murder of that young black child that took place not too long ago. You know, I think you have to relate that to what's happening in New York, when a policeman can go into a basement where black children are preparing for a surprise birthday party and are decorating a room and end up killing a 14-year-old brother, shooting him in the back of the head, saying that they thought he had a gun. You know, they thought the saw with which he was decorating the room was a gun. And see, that's why every time there's any eruption of racism in any form, we have to talk about building a movement to repel it. One of the things that was said by Georgy Dimitrov, who was a man who was one of the most outstanding leaders of the struggle against fascism, is that if you do not challenge every example, manifestation of fascism wherever it rears its head, then you are paving the way towards the full development and maturation of a fascist system. And I think that in this country, the fascist trends that we can see right now are being attached to this kind of racism. And if we can't understand that if we don't assist in building that kind of a movement to repel it, then we're going to be responsible ourselves. And I think that particularly the press has a special responsibility in this kind of struggle, because you can reach people. You can reach people in a way that we cannot reach people. And I think it's very important to understand that I mean, it's really your duty, if you believe that there should be justice, if you believe that that there should be an end to racism, to make a very special point of trying to get across the message that people who are trying to build movements against this racism, make a very special effort to get this across the masses of people so that they will know that there is some way that they can then participate in an effort, in a people's effort to repel this racism.
Do you feel there's anything constructive in having more
to repel this racism?
Do you feel there's anything constructive in having more black people in black communities as opposed to having white people?
Well, you know, it really depends on who they are. Because I think that we've learned, as a result of the experiences of the last years, that just because someone is black doesn't mean that he or she is necessarily on our side. Margaret Burnham, for example, who is with the Massachusetts Alliance and was a lawyer, one of my lawyers during the entire 16 months of my case. She's in court right now on a case involving the shooting in the back of a young black man by a black policeman. You know? And so it really, I mean, it's not so much. I mean, we can't confine our struggle to the attempt to get more black policemen on the police force. And certainly, I mean, I think, you know, that is not an invalid struggle. But the real issue has to be that of making those black policemen respect and relate to the community and not become a part of the apparatus that has been set up in a racist, you know, predominantly white police department. And unless there's that understanding, then we'll face exactly the same problems.
Any more questions?
Then do you really think that blacks should seek integration?
But you know, as I said before, that's really not the issue, and I don't think that should cloud the struggle, because you know what is integration all about? When we use the word integration in general, we think of something that's as you know, how did Malcolm put it? He says that, you know, black people really shouldn't talk about trying to integrate themselves into a sinking ship, right? But that doesn't mean that we do not demand the right to attend any school that we want to, wherever that school is. And certainly in a place like South Boston, where I can't imagine that the schools are fantastically good. I can't imagine that at a school that was, 94% white prior to the integration order, that the students were able to learn about the contributions of Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner and about the history of Puerto Rico and about the history of Indian people in this country, about the history of Chicanos. I can't imagine that was part of the education. And that, in my opinion, it must be a part of the education that every person, regardless of their color, receives in this country. So, I mean, that struggle has to be conducted too. But apart from that, we cannot allow ourselves to say that, you know, because we don't think integration is going to bring about any fundamental change, then we're not going to stand behind the right of those black students to attend South Boston High School without being stoned and without being, you know, subjected to that kind of violence. And that's why I think it's really important to have our minds clear on the character of the struggle and to see that busing has emerged into the issue in which the country is polarized in terms of those who are opposed to racism and those who are for racism. And let's not remember that it was Nixon who, during his 72 presidential campaign made the most outrageous statements, in effect supporting those who were opposed to busing. That was the way in which he was expressing his racism and what he wanted to see as a emerging racist pattern in this country. And Ted Kennedy makes a statement that he can understand how the parents of the white children in South Boston can be, or in Boston, can be concerned about busing. And then compare that, or connect that with the fact that he went about, when was it, a year and a half ago to Alabama and spoke on the same platform with the man who is the most notorious representative of racism globally. I'm talking about George Wallace. See, all of them are participating in the encouragement of a trend and a pattern of racism in this country, and it's our responsibility to fight it however it expresses itself. Okay. I think we have time perhaps for one more question, one more brief question.
The political economists in Boston and other areas have been saying that there'll be more speed up, more labor-intensive work, and all this toward increasing profits with less skill and less power, and what it means to speed up with people. What I'd like to ask you is whether, as this starts coming down, whether white people and black people will start to perhaps think about coming into your lives.
But you see, that is going to come about only if there is an organized effort to, again, repel racism. And, you know, I think that it's probably appropriate to end the press conference with a few comments on why it is so important now to encourage this kind of climate, racist climate. You see, with a worsening economic situation, with white workers now beginning to feel much of what black workers and Puerto Rican workers and Chicano workers and other workers of color have been feeling all along, they can perhaps be more effectively reached in terms of persuading them that their struggle alongside workers of color, black workers, Puerto Rican workers, is a struggle in their own interest. And I think that probably now in this country more than ever before in recent years, there is a significant base among, excuse, something's going on. There's a tape recorder. You know, that now white people, white workers are probably more receptive to these kinds of movements. And it's precisely when the objective possibility of building a united movement of masses of people which embraces blacks, Puerto Ricans, Chicanos, Asians, Indians, and white people, that those who will power in this country reach for that weapon which is going to most effectively disrupt that movement or nip that movement in the bud, prevent it from emerging. And historically, of course, racism has been the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of those who rule this country. And so that is why I think there is an encouragement of what we see happening in Boston now. That is why there is an intensification of police brutality in the ghettos and the barrios and on the reservations. I mean, that is why a man like George Wallace is, in effect, legitimized by politicians who have a history of being in the most liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And that is why they've even convinced some black politicians to come out in support of George Wallace, talking about the fact that this is the new Wallace. I mean, he's the same old Wallace, representing the same policies. He may have a better PR man who teaches him how to conceal a little more effectively his vulgarity. But it's the same. He's representing the same things. And those of us who sincerely understand and believe that the only way to prevent and I'm not afraid to use the word fascism, because I think that is what we're talking about. The only way to prevent this country from moving more rapidly in the direction of fascism is to build the kind of united movement in which people of all colors and working people of varying ideological directions, build that kind of movement in which we can express our collective voice. Now that is what we're trying to do in the Alliance, and I think that it should be very clear that aside from having black people and Indians and Asians and Chicanos and Puerto Ricans and white people in terms of our membership and leadership of the Alliance, we have communists. I'm a member of the Communist Party, but at the same time we have nationalists such as the Sisters and Brothers in the Republic of New Africa. We have members of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, as well as the American Indian Movement. We have non-political organizations such as the National Conference of Black Lawyers, as well as church groups and ministers such as Reverend Ben Chavis and Reverend Abernathy. And you see, we have come to the conclusion that in all of the close to 200 organizations that are now affiliated with the Alliance, and with all of the varying ideological trends that are represented, that we do not use the Alliance as an arena for airing out differences, because there are differences, many differences, many ideological differences on how we go about finally bringing about the liberation of our peoples. But we don't use the Alliance as an arena to air those differences for the sake of building a united movement against racism, against repression. We put those differences in the closet. And we say that the only way we can create the kind of climate again where all of us can struggle without fear of ending up on the other side of prison walls. The only way we can begin to push back some of this racism is to build the most powerful kind of unity. Because if not, they'll knock us off one by one. And it's happening. I personally just got busted the other day in Oakland for no reason at all. And that's part of the pattern that has emerged in the Bay Area, connected with, the zebra checks and the killings that have taken place of young black children. I was the other day in the hospital trying to see my doctor, and suddenly found myself surrounded by Oakland policemen and Alameda County sheriffs grabbing me from behind, handcuffing me and they had no warrant, no nothing. But this is what we're dealing with, and I feel now, I know now that if something does happen, that there will be thousands of people throughout this country who will be willing to come to my aid. Just as Clyde Bellacourt, who is one of the other co-chairpersons of the Alliance, knows that there is a movement all over this country that assisted them to gain the victory in Russell Means' case and Dennis Banks' case, and that is going to continue to push for the dismissal of the indictments against all the Wounded Knee defendants. And so, that is what we're all about, and I'm sorry that, time has run out, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, well, I don't have to say All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Sunday, I have some more questions.
I'm gonna go.
I write on the left at your day.
I'm gonna go now to UMass. If you give me the sign sheet, I'll stick it in my record.
No,
Okay, I'll stick it in my record. And people
Next one is along, so maybe it's before.
Yeah, I use that fast and say we're gonna answer any questions. Are you trying to get far, okay? If I went home without it, what's her name? Her name was Michelle.
That money will be used by the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression to assist in building the movement to repel the growing racism in this country, to assist to free more sisters and brothers who are unjustly incarcerated in the prisons across this country. So rest assured that your money is going to be used to further a just cause. Now let me begin by saying a few words about the work of the Alliance nationally before we begin to talk about what you can do right here on this campus about the situation that is unfolding in your backyard. And I think perhaps first, what I want to try to do is to persuade those of you who do not already know that there's something wrong with the system of justice in this country. Injustice. Let me do that by, first of all, reading a quotation from an article which I read in Newsweek about a month and a half ago. writing the article. This is from a teacher. He said a group of men swept away a golf ball, while a few others ambled up to the putting green. There was a gentle breeze creating ripples in the light platoon. There's a man and a woman kissing. There's a man meditating. And there's some people sitting out on a patio. Now, what do you imagine this dream is describing? Well, anyway, he goes on to say things like smoking dope and guzzling booze are reportedly not uncommon pastimes in the remote reaches of the city. But then he goes on to say that there are no walls, there are no fences, there are no bars, there are no locks on the doors, and the relatively few guards are unarmed. He says that there are 3-day furloughs to visit home. He's talking about the place where people like Donald Segretti, who was Nixon's dirty trick head and the committee to be elected, he's talking about the place where this man did his time after having been convicted of some of the most dangerous crimes against all of the people of the United States. He's talking about the place where John Dean is sitting. He's talking about the place where the Watergate came up. There's a place in California called Lompoc. It's exactly the prison he described. It's not what I can think about. And there's a place on the East Coast, in Pennsylvania, Albany, Pennsylvania, where Curtis is just magnificent tennis lessons. The reason I want you to think about that is because how many of you have seen law schools? How many of you know what is going on behind the walls there? How many of you know about not only the incredible brutality that is inflicted upon the prisoners by the jailers, but how many of you know about these savage experiments to modify the behavior of prisoners who are not passive enough, who are not submissive enough, who do not act the way the guards expect them to act or want them to act?
I need a guy that's psychosensory, frontal or bottom. Right on, I hear it.
Right. I hear it. It's happening in places like Vacaville, California, in North Carolina. At this very moment, a facility is under construction by the federal government with funds directly from the Justice Department in the amount of $13 billion. It's called Butler Center. They used to call it Butler Center for behavioral research. But then people started saying that sounded very much like what was described in that Norway software art. So then the government changed the name to Federal Center for Correctional Research. See, that is what the masters of prisoners are enforced to suffer. And that is what we shall do. That is what they would do to Israel. That is what they would have done to George Jackson if they had not first assassinated. And if you talk about Sam Clinton as being not the exceptional situation when it comes to prisons in this country. But the rule when you're talking about prisons that are inhabited by black people, farmers, Indians, and so white people, because those prisons are for the poor. You know, the Alamos and the Lombards are for the rich, or for those who are the spokespeople for the ruling class of this country. Consider, and you compare a Allenwood to a Walpole or a Fresno or a San Quentin or a Soledad or a Leavenworth or any other prison in this country. Let's take another situation to reveal what the state of the so-called justice system is in this country. Consider the fact that just about a week ago, a federal judge decided that he was going to reverse the conviction of William County. Reverse the conviction of a man who admittedly killed and gave the order to massacre at least 22 Vietnamese children and women and elderly men. And the high judge thinks that because there was too much publicity around the My Lai massacre, what about all the other My Lais that never did get publicized? And then, when the president non-elect they're going to have to do what I say. I mean, that's not accuracy that he talked about. And those are the men that we really should be proud of. And those are the ones who refuse to be criminals, who refuse to go and slaughter their sisters and their brothers in Vietnam. And they should be our heroes. Amen. I just wanted to make sure that they weren't talking, what was being said, but it was very important. It's very important for us to understand the seriousness of the situation. Because, I didn't come here just to talk. I came here because I think it is so important for us to build a common movement, to get ourselves together, to unite and organize, and use the little power that we have to do something to protect our sisters and brothers, the ones who are doing all of the suffering, and in that way to protect ourselves in our own right, in our own community. You see, you have a man like Richard Nixon who committed the worst crimes against the people of this country, and he did more to subvert the Constitution that, half of us can't even call upon in the first place. With a few vestiges of democracy that remain in this country, he did more to subvert that than any other man in recent history. And then he gets on front street. And then let's take it a step further. The man who's about to become your vice president, non-elected. Word never were able to say anything about. And these are the ones who are supposed to be your leaders. And look, Rockefeller, when he comments on Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, says that this was an act of conscience, an act of compassion, an act of courage. But 3 years ago, when there were men out of prison who wrote him in July 1971 to ask him to come to Attica and see for himself the savage, animal-like conditions in which they were forced to live, to see that they needed food that they could eat, that they needed more sanitary conditions in the mess hall, that they needed better medical care, but they wanted to have representation before the parole board. They wrote him and asked him to come to Attica to see all this. And he responded saying nothing. He was silent. And then they wrote letters to other people, no response whatever, so that finally, in September, when they decided to gather together their forces and to dramatically present their demands so that all of the people of this country could understand what was happening there. And then maybe after that, Rockefeller would become a little bit more compassionate, or would be pressured into answering their grievances. What did Rockefeller do?
He called the National Guard. Told them to come in with their guns.
Hey,
so everybody in the place.
That's right, but when they asked for amnesty, let's try to keep the comparison going. He said that when Nixon got amnesty, that was compassion, that was conscience, that was courage. But what did he say when those brothers asked for immunity from prosecution? Immunity from being prosecuted for assuming the stance which they did as a last resort of being able to communicate their grievances to the people, and they had not hurt anyone. What did he say? Rockefeller said that if he were to grant them immunity from prosecution, that would be, and I have the exact quote, this is what he said before a commission. By the way, I went to D.C. the other day on behalf of the National Alliance in order to make it very clear that we were not going to allow Nelson Rockefeller to be confirmed without reminding the people of this country who he really is. So I don't seem to have the exact quote with me, but check out If you check out the report that was written by the special commission appointed by Rockefeller to investigate Agatha, you will see that he said before that commission that if he had granted immunity to those brothers, that would have been a gross abuse of executive power. It would have brought about a situation where the whole structure of justice would have been subverted and perhaps destroyed. That individual liberty would be severely attacked were he to grant those brothers immunity from prosecution. And then you're right. Instead of granting them immunity from prosecution, what does he do? He sends in the National Guard. He sends in the state police. He sends in the prison guards, and they're armed with helicopters and F-16s. And according to the report of that commission which he appointed, in the space of 15 minutes, in the 15 minutes it took them to retake the city, 39 human beings were killed and 80 more were wounded. In 15 minutes. And that commission said that this was, with the exception of the Indian massacres at the end of the century, the worst encounter between Americans since the Civil War. And this is what Rockefeller is responsible for. And when he testified in D.C. before those very same senators before whom I testified, he didn't deny that he was the one who gave the order. Because he couldn't. And he didn't even say that he was wrong. He defended what he did. And that is the man. That is the man who is about to become the vice president.
No.
We're going to have to do something about it. We're going to have to do something. But see, what should have happened is after Nixon resigned, folks shouldn't have let Ford. First of all, he never should have been appointed as the vice president. Who selected Ford anyway? You know? Nixon. Whose personal choice was Ford? Doesn't that sound weird that the man who was incredible can then appoint the successor? Very determined publicity campaign to create in your mind an attitude towards Ford as being maybe, like your uncle. They showed you pictures of him in his swimming trunks, diving into a swimming pool on the front page of the Boston Globe. Dancing with Happy Rockefeller. And they wanted you to forget about the fact that his policy, a Nixon policy. What did he say when he was confronted with the question of inflation? What did he say? He said, well, one thing we're going to do, we're not going to cut back on defense spending. And what did he talk about cutting back on? Programs and institutions that relate to us. You talk about black students on this campus. How many of you have some kind of a scholarship? Well, where are those funds going that you used to have? See, that's what he's talking about cutting. all of, so-called poverty programs. So that's what I mean. That's what I mean. He's just doing the very same thing that Nixon was doing. And who was it that said in 1972? I can understand why white parents might be upset about busing, and I don't think that means they're necessarily biased. We came out with who said that? You heard one single statement that has been made by the president of this country in opposition to what is going down right now in South Boston? I mean, if he was sincerely interested in anything in this country, then he has to talk about being interested, being concerned about black children being stoned and being forced to be the targets of the most vulgar, racist epithets that are hurled at them by important for us to begin to understand what racism is all about. It's important for white people to understand how racism is used against them also. How many of those white people who are out there spitting and throwing rocks and booing and doing all that, how many of them remember that when they go into the supermarket, they can't buy their steaks anymore because the prices have gone up? How many of them think about the fact that the inflation in this country is eventually, if it hasn't already begun to affect them, it's going to completely diminish their ability to do any of the things that they used to do. I just saw a program on TV not too long ago. And the point that they were making was that now, not even the average family can talk about buying a house. It's not just poor people who can't buy their houses. The typical white family in this country can no longer talk about buying a house because it's too expensive. It's getting worse. And it's getting worse. But you see, what happens is that those white people who get so upset about black people, black children coming to a school in their neighborhood, they forget about the ways in which they are exploited. And they facilitate their own oppression and their own exploitation. Rockefeller, whose ability to make profits depends upon the exploitation of people who work in places like Chase Manhattan Bank and Standard Oil and IBM and CBS and Pan Am and Eastern Airlines. Those are just a small fraction of the corporations controlled by the Rockefeller family, directly by the Rockefeller family. See, they are very happy to see that going down in South Boston. Because they know that those people, and most of them are working people, they're not going to be thinking about getting together and striking. They're not going to be thinking about walking out of their jobs to demand higher salary. All they're thinking about is, they want to get those black people. All they're thinking about is, their passion completely veil the fact that they're also okay. See, I think that it's important to understand the dynamic of racism. Because what we are facing in this country today is a situation that is that irreversible. You know, this isn't just one more crisis, what's happening with the economy now. This isn't just something that's going to last, you know, for a year, for 6 months, or for a year and a half. This is an indication of the eternal deterioration of the capitalist system. Very upset. That's why they react so desperately. And that is why, and you know, you not only have to talk about this country, because the kind of capitalism under which we live now is a global phenomenon. If you talk about, you know, Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, you have to remember that there's a Chase Manhattan Bank in Pretoria, South Africa. And if you talk about an Anaconda Papa, in the United States of America, which is also controlled by the Rockefeller family. You also have to remember that there was, and there is now again, an Anaconda Papa in Santiago de Chile. And you have to talk about IT&T not only here, but also in Chile. And I think that if we use the example of what happened in Chile, then we can begin to see how desperately people who rule this country are responding to the efforts of peoples all over the world to seize what is rightfully theirs. What happened in Chile? When the people of Chile voted into power, the Unidad Popular government, which was headed by Salvador Allende, they said that they wanted socialism. That vote was for a vote to initiate a revolutionary process to usher in a socialist society for the people of Chile. And so what did they begin by doing? They began by nationalizing their natural resources.
You need to go to college.
Before the fascist coup. One of the most moving experiences that I had was to see little children, you know, talking about building a society that would respond to their needs, a society where they would be able to be happy. And they talked about not only relating to what was happening in their country, but they felt very strongly for the children of Vietnam. And they would talk about helping the children of Vietnam, before the peace treaty, to live in a world that was free from B-52s and napalm and all of that. Anyway, as I was saying, one of the most moving experiences was to see the children, you know, talking about their copper. And they said that copper that was under the ground belonged to them. And they should be able to use it, you know, for their food and for their schools and for their hospitals. And that's what they told to Anaconda Papa. That's what they said. Anaconda Papa, go back where you came from. You know, go back to the headquarters of imperialism in the United States of America. And then they told IT&T to get out of the land that belongs to the people of Chile. And to stop robbing them of their wealth and of their labor, because they want to begin to use their wealth and their labor in order to build a society that would allow them to unfold their talent, to develop their creativity, and to become happy human beings. That's what it was all about. So what is the CIA? You know, you get back to that desperate response on the part of the rulers of global capitalism. They told you, Kissinger told you that maybe it was true that ICT got together $1 million and went over there and tried to prevent Allende from being arrested, but they said no, but that was all happening. The government didn't have anything to do with it. The Pentagon wasn't involved. The CIA wasn't involved. We weren't involved. And now you're beginning to learn that Kissinger is a liar. And I've been when I've been speaking on campus, to get across that point, I've been urging people to get a hold of this book, because it really pulls the covers off of your book. It's by an ex-CIA. It's called The CIA and Corporate Intelligence by Victor Marchetti and a man by the name of John D. Barr. And I've been pointing out that if you open this book, by the way, was censored before it was published. And the passages were deleted. And to show you that they don't want you to know how much of a liar Kissinger is, all you have to do is turn to page 14, and you see a passage that's been completely deleted by the government. It was published by Alfred Snuff. And then it says, Henry Kissinger made that statement. Not in public, but at a secret White House meeting on June 27, 1970. The country he was referring to was Chile. And then it goes, then it goes down and says, on that Saturday in June 1970, the main topic before the 40 Committee, which is the secret committee which plans covert operations in other countries, according to the CIA. It's like, it's like if they get caught in the act, then the president can say, well, I didn't know anything about that. There's no mission possible. That's what it's all about. Anyway, it says on that Saturday in June 1970, the main topic before the 40 Committee was the and then it goes down here, page 17, it says, Henry Kissinger, the single most powerful man at the 40 Committee meeting on Chile, and the whole rest of the page. The whole half of the page is deleted. Hey, right, we have to talk about that too. Because the threat which was, hurled at the people in the Arab countries because of the fact that, we know that in all of the Arab countries, the leaders are not the ones who represent the interests of all the people, but at least they have they have a right to their oil. Their oil does not belong to Rockefeller. It doesn't belong to those people. But let me try to bring the situation back home, because we got to talk about what we're going to do about it. And as I said before, I'm representing the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And that is an organization which for which we laid the basis shortly after I was acquitted. I guess some of you remember what happened during the course of my trial. Some of you recall that there was a tremendous movement, and I know that there are many of you here who participated in one way or another. Large way or small way. But I know that every single one of you who bought a button, signed a petition, or bought a poster, assisted in the movement, which eventually was able to bring about my freedom. And there were literally tens of hundreds of thousands of people throughout the country and throughout the world. And that movement in itself was a challenge to the kinds of injustices about which we can speak. And I never saw that movement as being simply a movement to free Angela Davis. You know, I'm just one individual. I was just one victim. Just one drop in a whole barrel of destruction. And so afterwards, we said that we had to try to reach all of those sisters and brothers who were involved in the campaign, the anti-racist, anti-repression campaign, which brought about my freedom, and informed them that their mission was not accomplished. The mission was not yet accomplished. In fact, I think that the most important thing that was accomplished by that campaign, the most important meaning of that not guilty verdict that was pronounced by the jury before which I was tried, was that if only we can build mass movements encompassing thousands, tens of thousands, and these millions of people, mass movements of black people, and Puerto Ricans, and Chicanos, and Indians, and Asians, and white people, and workers, and students, and communists, and non-communists, and socialists, and nationalists, and Pan-Africanists, and trade unionists, and ministers, and other church people, and people who don't believe in God. If we can reach everybody in this country who has some vestige of human decency left within them, then we can talk about organizing our collective power and doing something to put a dent in this incredible apparatus of the church. Because we looked around us when I was set free and we said, hey, there's still a brother in San Quentin by the name of Michelle McGee who has the very same right to a mass movement as I do. There's still 6 brothers, Peter Drongo, Luis Salamonte, Hugo Chanel, Willie Tate, David Johnson, John Fain, who are facing charges as a result of the prison hierarchy's attempts to cover up their assassination of George Jackson. There's still the Alphabet, Martin Sostra. There's Marie Hill in North Carolina. And there was a brother by the name of Reverend Ben Davis, who presently is facing over 200 years of prison. And the same goes on. And there was farm workers who were being attacked simply because they were trying to build their own lives. And we looked across the country and we saw literally hundreds of cases of Harlem 6, Carlos Feliciano, Rosales Del Barrio, Gary Martin, Leotis Johnson, Norma just in a little town called Amador, Oklahoma. And then we realized that the cases that we knew about were really only the tip of an iceberg. And there were so many more who were being forced to suffer in their own. And home, he said, we need to reach every single human being in this country who still can feel some compassion and who still can understand that if they do not involve themselves in this movement now, then they might be the next victim. And that's why we began to try to build the National Alliance. And the class that is supposed to be held in this hall at 2 o'clock is apparently waiting.
Because people are waiting to come in.
So much. It has to be said.
Chuck's poetry.
Like I said before, sometimes it's really hard. I wanted to talk about the fact that you have to begin to recognize that every person in this country, again, who is opposed to injustice, has to begin to support the people of Puerto Rico. You have not seen a history book in which they talk about colonialism, in which they talk about what was British colonialism, Portuguese colonialism, South African colonialism. But how many of you have read any of those history books that the United States of America, the government of the country, is a colonial power and is still holding the people of Puerto Rico in colonial bondage? Including delegates from all over the world, said that we do not accept the U.S. definition of Puerto Rico as what they call it, a protectorate or a territory. We don't accept that kind of euphemism any longer. And the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a resolution saying that Puerto Rico was an outright colony of the government of the United States of America. And what they also said, this is what the United Nations said, that people who are subjected to colonial subjugation have the right to use any means at their disposal to achieve their liberation. Right. The question of Puerto Rico, not the question of South Africa, and other peoples who are being held in colonial bondage have to be placed on the agenda of every progressive movement in this country. And I'm going to ask you to participate in an event. How many of you have been to New York before? It's not that far away. You know, when I used to go to Van Dyke. I used to go to New York when I had to go, or when I wanted to go. In any event, on Sunday, October 27th, is that October 27th? Yeah. On Sunday, October 27th, there is going to be a massive rally in Madison Square Garden in order to declare that day a day of solidarity with the people of Puerto Rico. Our central demand, when we have that event, and there are going to be many participants and many speakers, there will be entertainment, it will be an entire evening, an entire day of solidarity of the people, with the people of Puerto Rico. And one of our central demands is going to be the demand to free the Puerto Rican nationals who are the oldest political prisoners in this country, who have been in prison for 20 years. And we are saying, free Lolita Lebron. Oscar Collazo and Rafael Miranda and powerful campaign to ensure that Sister Louisa LeBlanc and her comrades are able once more to participate in the movement for the freedom of their people out here. You see, they told Louisa recently that she would receive parole. But then they said that there was a condition under which that parole would be granted. That condition would be that if she agreed not to associate with her comrades in her party, the National Party of Citizens, and if she agreed not to associate with anyone who was involved in the movement for the independence of citizens. And so I think that everyone here should feel the responsibility to get involved in the movement, to bring her out here in the streets so that she can be with her people where she belongs. There's so many other cases that I want to ask you to get involved in, but let me remind you that, first of all, I'd like to previously I read a ticket about October 27th. No, there are.
You can get them before it gets to Sunday.
Just for this Sunday. Wait a second.
You can get them before it gets to the union.
If you go to the Puerto Rican Student Union, you can get tickets for October 27th. And I'm sure that if you have problems with transportation, you can ride a bus, or you can get together a carpool and put 5 in a car and go down to New York on October 27th. That's going to be so important, that event. And then talk about supporting the Addison brothers. And, like I said, there are all those cases in North Carolina and all the others that I've mentioned. We have some material from the Alliance on those cases and on ways in which you can get involved. The sisters and brothers who organize this event will have that material, and I hope that you will contact them and get it so that you can see what contribution you can make. Now, I think that you have to be very, very vigilant about what's happening over there in South Boston. And it's going to be necessary to talk about mobilizing all of the progressive people in this city to build a movement that is going to send those racists home. And it can be done. I was just... Where's the class? Where's the professor of that class?
It's too much.
I know that there's so many things that you should not only not learn when you talk. They mess up your mind. You're capable of learning after you learn. All right. This morning at a press conference, someone was asking me how would we propose to do something about what's happening out there in South Boston. And what I did was recollected something that happened to us recently in North Carolina. We went to North Carolina. When did you hear in North Carolina for that demonstration on July 4th? Did any of you hear about it? Because, we were going to North Carolina to talk about abolishing the death penalty so that You know, those 50 some odd people who are on death row, including a black woman and an Indian woman, would not be sent to the gas chambers. We were there to talk about, freeing all of the men shavers, to talk about freeing this brother named Donald Smith, who got sentenced to 40 years in prison because they charged him with putting a Molotov cocktail in a boy's bathroom during a protest to have Martin Luther King's birthday celebrated in a high school. You know, these are the kinds of things that we were dealing with. We were talking about closing the doors of this Buckner Institute that I spoke about earlier. And so there was some racist, there's a group in North Carolina. A group that's called the Rights of White People. It's headed by a man named Leroy Gibson. And they're serious. Because they patrol the streets with semi-automatic weapons, the streets of eastern North Carolina. They bombed black newspapers who would come out in support of Reverend Ben Shavers. They bombed a bookstore that was run primarily by white activists who were involved in the struggle to free political prisoners in North Carolina. And they said that they were going to stop our demonstration. They said that they were going to be out there in full force, and they were going to prevent us from marching down the street and marching past the prison where all those brothers on death row are being held. And so they made it known that they had established a coalition between the white right. They had gotten into their coalition the Ku Klux Klan, whom they say is moderate anyway. The John Birch Society, the Minutemen, and the American Nazi Party. And so they said, they went to the police, and they even asked the police for a permit to demonstrate. And they received their first permits to line the sidewalk of the march. We were marching in the streets. They intended to be on both sides. And they said they were going to have at least 700 demonstrators. But that was a week before the demonstration. They were saying that they were going to. Now, we said that we realized that if we had come to North Carolina with only 1,000 people, we would have been bad. Because there probably would have been some catastrophe. If we had come with 2,000 people, there probably would have been a lot of problems too, or 3,000. But see, when we went to North Carolina on July 4th, to the national freedom of all of our sisters and brothers, we had 10,000 sisters. And it was not only the fact that we had 10,000, but when they looked out in the crowd, they saw large numbers of black people. They saw large numbers of Puerto Ricans. They saw a delegation of 300 strong of Puerto Ricans from New York. They saw a delegation of Indian sisters and brothers who had come all the way from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and St. Paul. And then they saw Chicanos who had come from the Southwest. There was even a huge delegation from the Third World Student Coalition of Arab students, among the Ethiopian students, Egyptian students, the Vietnamese students. They had come from the University of Oregon in Eugene. And so, they also saw, and this is perhaps what really blew their minds, they saw a live white there were many white people involved in the march to send a few in to infiltrate But what I'm saying is, what they saw, not only our numbers, but once they saw our unity and our togetherness and our solidarity, they couldn't deal with that. And so when the time came for them to stop our march, we were 10,000 and wasn't but about 15 of them standing outside. In fact, well, I have some pictures of them, so you can see it. They look pretty pitiful. See, that's what it's all about. And I know that you can run those races home. If you can build that kind of a movement in your city. And you won't ought to feel a special responsibility since you're so close. You know? And since I saw some buses driving up onto the campus as we were coming in. And I think those buses carried large numbers of students from South Boston who were being brought here because some kind of something went down over there. And so you really ought to talk about trying to get involved in organizing, because it's not just a question of busing. I mean, we're not worried about busing. Because if you go, across this country, probably half the students go to school have to ride the bus. That's not the bus that they're upset about. It's racism. And this is one of the ways in which you can participate in the effort to push back a growing trend, a growing pattern of racism. One of the things you can do is to help the sisters and brothers who live in Columbia Point, right here, protect themselves from those gunshots that come from strange cars. You know, they said, I read an article in the Boston Globe in which they said the police were saying that there were shots coming from the project, coming out of the project. And then somebody, I think it was the local head of the NAACP, went down to check the situation out. He said, well, why is it that there's so many bullet holes? The shots coming from the project. So find out what is going on and ask the sisters and brothers there if they need your help. And I'm sure they will be more than willing to accept it. And again, this campus is invested right in the middle.